trail of blood up the road. He was just screaming. And I don't know whether my heart will ever feel the same again from terrible nightmares that he's being stabbed. Screaming. And I wish I could undo what all the kids have seen.
Hello, you are tuned in to Always an Alternative, the podcast, where we discuss serious youth violence and the impact it has on our families, friends and communities. We also discuss gang crimes, unpicking the mind of individuals that went down the wrong path to discover the pivotal point which enabled them to change their lives around. Real talk, real people. Enjoy listening.
Welcome to Always an Alternative, the podcast. On today's show, we're speaking to Sally. Sally's son was stabbed at the age of 16 as he was riding his bike home from his friend's house. So Sally, thank you for coming to the show. Can we start off by knowing a little bit more about your son and what it was like before the incident?
Yeah, so he was a good kid, really. There's not much more to say. I couldn't ask for much more in a son. He did what he was supposed to be doing at school, a little bit mischief, not coming home on time at night, but it was mainly because he was banging into his bikes. And we have a thing up here in London, Bike Life, and probably around the country, I don't know, but we have bike storms as well, like a biannual ride out that all the kids go to. So that was the only issue I had with him, was getting him off that bike and getting him home at a reasonable time. But other than that, he's a pretty good kid.
So the stabbing then, how old was he when it happened?
He had just turned 16.
Okay, he was 16. And what happened? What was the incident? How did it go down?
So, well, basically, it was very close to our home, and he'd been out on his bike, and they've been doing a few tricks. Him and his mates decided to edit a few videos, which is kind of what they do, of the different tricks they've done, and post them up and that, and compare what they've been up to. It was quite late, but he was only 200 metres from home. He got on his bike to come home and basically noticed there was 4 men or boys, we don't know, helmets, balaclavas, completely covered up on 2 mopeds. So there was two driving the mopeds and 2 on the back, 2 passengers. And they started checking him out and looking over his shoulder at him. And he thought, oh, don't like the look of that. I'll go back to my mate's house. So he spun round to go back to his mate's house. When they turned, followed him and basically cornered him in a doorway. And you've got to remember, this is someone, he ain't never carried a knife. So he was helpless. They jumped off the back. One of them went to stab him in the chest. He does have a problem with his chest anyway. He's got a deformity in that. He bent forward to protect his chest and it went through his back into his lung. That's a really deep knife wound. And then he collapsed. The bike fell on top of him and the other suspects started stabbing for his groin. So he was just screaming, helpless and screaming. By some form of a miracle, the bike kind of saved his life, really, I guess, because the knife ricocheted off the bike repeatedly and it just slashed his leg a couple of times, like superficial wounds. But that wasn't the case with the one in his back. So luckily enough, someone disturbed the incident. Someone saw it going on. It was a passerby in a car, tooted his horn repeatedly and they made off. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened.
So how many times was he stabbed altogether? Was it just the one in his back and then the little slashes on his legs?
Yeah, and this is what's a bit scary as well. It only takes 1 knife wound because that was the fatal. We're lucky enough we still have him today, but that was the wound that nearly took his life. So if you want to know a bit more from there, he basically jumped on his bike to get home, but realised very quickly he was losing consciousness. We had a trail of blood up the road where it had gone through his T-shirt, his hoodie, his puffer jacket, down his bike and up the road to where he collapsed. And it was heartbreaking, basically.
It happened. How long did the ambulance take? Who found him?
Yeah, so the passerby that had seen the attack followed him on his bike and obviously then realised what had happened. He passed out and then he got some consciousness back and he saw this person coming up the road. So he sort of stumbled out, bouncing off cars and shit, is what he said. So the person that had seen the attack had tried to follow him and find him and saw him trying to get up and get help. So he called for the ambulance, knocked on neighbours' doors and stuff. And the ambulance, it took long enough because the neighbours have said, you know, that person that witnessed it, he was pacing up and down the road like in pieces. He was too scared to give a witness statement.
What damage did the stabbing do then?
So basically, it went through his back and obviously went into some major arteries and into his lung as well. At first, it didn't appear too bad, but by the time he got to the hospital in the ambulance, it was clear he was in big trouble from that one wound. It basically, his chest cavity, which is the area in between your lung and your rib cage, like the chest wall, had filled with so much blood and air that he could no longer breathe properly. He was aware all the time that this was happening in the ambulance. He verbalised to me that he said to the ambulance lady, "I'm not breathing properly, am I going to be all right?" So by the time he was got to hospital, they very quickly realised he was in a really bad way. So the procedures they carried out from there, I couldn't see him to begin with because they had to insert a chest drain. There's different sizes. The one they used for him was quite big. It was like an inch across, so maybe like 2 inches in diameter. That had to have a puncture sort of incision made whilst he was awake as well. I think they medicated him, but in between his ribs and into his chest cavity. And then you've got a long tube, maybe 5 inches long. It would surprise you how long it is, that is stuffed down inside your chest, which actually he said to me that's more painful than the knife in his back. 100% way more painful. Every time you breathe, it's like agony because your lung is like hitting the tube. The doctors and surgeons would just keep saying you've got to try and take deep breaths. He's also like quite sick in the hospital, and I know that was the point at which I thought he didn't cry, but that was the point at which I looked at him and thought, oh my God, you're in proper agony, because as he was being sick again, the big tube that was inside of his chest was, you know, it's in your chest, it shouldn't be in there. It's like the knife goes in, it comes out, but that has to stay in, else you're going to die. He had that in for quite some time, and even when he took it out, it wasn't straightforward. When the intensive care unit tried to take it out, that wasn't straightforward either. So basically, he had a punctured lung, like serious breathing difficulties. He ended up having 8 pints of blood as quickly as they were. Well, it was actually like 4 pints of blood and 4 of plasma, and like lots of other stuff. But as quickly as they were infusing it, he was losing it, and that was the problem. Thankfully, they used like blood clotting ingredients. They got a surgeon out and they managed to sort that out. But like I said, when they took the chest drain out, that was another drama in itself, because they had to put another one in. He took a deep breath and literally the bandage in the hospital blew off of his chest where the air was coming out of his lung still, and it all leaked into the chest cavity again. So then air in his chest prevented his lung from inflated. So then we had to get another surgeon come down to intensive care and put in another chest drain, but thankfully it was nowhere as near as big as the first one. But nevertheless, you're still walking around with a plastic container. It looks like almost like how would I describe it? Like a takeaway, one in plastic takeaway pots, but it stands up on its side.
Okay, so that sounds pretty bad. How long was he in hospital for? Well, sorry, how long was he in intensive care for, and then how long did he stay in hospital for?
Yeah, so he was in intensive care for just over a week. When we went up to the normal ward, he was only there for a day or 2 days, I think. So yeah, in the major trauma unit to begin with, and then they transferred him to intensive care, and then to a ward for a couple of days before he was allowed out.
Okay, so people think automatically when you're out of hospital, that's because you're fitting well and you can mobilise as you did before. Was that the case with your son? Was he, did he need help cleaning, cooking, getting around?
Yeah, no, it wasn't the case with him. I will just add one other thing about in hospital as well, that eventually when we were allowed to bring the family in, so his brothers and sisters were allowed to see him, and they said you should be able to go on the ward. They put him in a wheelchair because he still couldn't walk. He couldn't even sit up on his own. And they witnessed him having what they call his vasovagal, a bit like fainting, but basically your whole body shuts down. So all his brothers and sisters witnessed that, and it was the worst experience.
I bet they were terrified.
They were terrified, crying. You know, his 8-year-old, well, 7-year-old at the time, his brother crying his eyes out. Oh my gosh, his body's been under so much. He's been through so much. He's basically walking about with someone else's blood. That's how much blood he's had. To say that the twinkle in his eye had gone and he looked like a different person from the time of that attack would be an understatement, really. But to go back to the question you were asking of when we went home, yeah, the dramas kind of didn't end there, really. He was told he weren't allowed to do very much for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Weren't allowed to go out, lift stuff. He had to do his exams at home, his GCSEs, which he did do, which I'm quite proud of him about. But on another level, behind the scenes, what was really awful was he needed help being bathed. You know, in the hospital, he needed help going to the toilet and that, but we got to a stage he could go to the toilet when we come out of hospital. But to have to bath your teenage son is horrible. Like, even for me to think about how it was for him to have to say, see me really busy with, because I've got several children, see me really busy with all the children, trying to run the house and keep things ticking over as normal and the kids going to school. And he would quietly in the corner say, I really need a bath. You haven't got time to bath me, have you, Mum? And that's how it was. And it went through my mind, would anybody, any teenager like to go through this? No way.
It's like almost becoming a baby again, fully dependent on you when he was able to do it himself beforehand.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Fully dependent. And, you know, knowing at the same time that as a parent I was under pressure, I could see that in him. And he was well aware of it was putting me under more and more pressure. He's 8 now. He still has nightmares. When we're talking about a year later, he dreams of being stabbed a lot. And I won't ever judge or think my kids shouldn't be, you know, it's what you go through. Because even as a parent, I was pretty petrified because I thought, oh my God, this is going on out there and it's affecting innocent people. You know, your trust in human beings, it just snatches it out of the palm of your hand and you have to kind of start rebuilding it again. And that's not an overnight thing.
Yeah. We talked a lot about the physical injuries, but what about mentally? Like, is he the same person as he was before it happened? Has he changed?
No, he's changed. He's different, completely different. He's such a strong spirit and he tries to get out and go along, do things. But the truth is, first time he went out after it happened, he had a huge panic attack because psychologically he thought people could stab him. So he had obviously, when you look at the bigger picture, he'd been put in a position where he was totally helpless in the arms of these people. He stopped going out pretty much. You know, if he was going to work or whatever with his employer, he would do that. But as far as going out and socialising, for the first while, even standing, if someone knocked for him, even standing on the pathway in our front garden was traumatising. I could tell it'd come in like a nervous wreck. Otherwise, looking up and down the road. Absolutely, you know, constant high alert, like who's got what. But to be honest, I felt the same. I felt the same. All of a sudden, I'd find myself getting the sleeping baby out of the car and thinking, oh my God, that bloke could have a knife and I've got a sleeping baby. What if he stabbed me? From my son's point of view, he was frightened to go outside, really frightened to go outside. Even being in intensive care for that amount of time, you can't, if something weird happens, like you almost become dependent on that situation and those surroundings. So you feel quite vulnerable when you come out. And then you've got to add into the equation that when we come out, obviously we had to look at the amount of blood that was lost in our street was quite a lot, and it was there for months. That had a terrible impact on not just my son, but myself and my children. The younger children, probably even more so than the older ones. So his 8-year-old brother still suffers to this day, and we're talking like a year later, from terrible nightmares that he's being stabbed. He wakes up often. From my son's point of view that was attacked, he said it kind of makes you lose trust in human beings and you start doubting people. And you can't, we are moving house. We're moving out of London on the back of all this because the area we live in is bad for violence. Like my son said to me, you can't move in doesn't make you suddenly start trusting everyone there. They're two separate things altogether. So yeah, even myself, I doubt people all the time now. It's not a nice place to be. A nice place to be is when you know you're surrounded by people you trust, and that makes you happy. Doubting everyone, feeling unsure about everyone, it just brings in so much anxiety, so much sadness. It's so distracting to walk down the street and look at groups of kids or whatever and doubt them and feel fearful, which ones have got knives down their pants or whatever, because it is, unfortunately, the area where we are at the moment is a massive problem. It's not a nice way to be living your life.
What I find crazy is that a lot of people won't never know where it happened. Obviously, your son knows where it happened, but you wouldn't know where it happened. You probably wouldn't ever see that place, and your family definitely wouldn't know where it was. But because it happened so close to home, you have to drive past, walk past the place where it happened, where your son could have died. What's that effect? Do you try and take a route, say it happened on the right-hand side of the road? Do you walk down the left-hand side, or do you just get used to it now?
That's exactly what happens. You come out. We couldn't avoid. There was blood all down the road because I think I've already said, but he got on his bike and it was pumping that much. It was going through his t-shirt, his hoodie, and his coat, down his bike and up the road. And then the final point where he collapsed, obviously it was there. But yeah, like you said, where the attack actually happened, what that stirs up was something else. And you take different routes. You notice when you drive past it, the kids go quiet. And this goes on for weeks and then into months. And then it's a very, very long time. In fact, it might have been 7 or 8 months before I thought to myself, do you know what, I'm going to actually cross the road and look at where it happened. I thought I need to do it. I can't, you can't avoid passing it because it's so close to home. It's crazy. Every single one of my children said the same thing. I can't walk past there. I don't like it. But obviously, it gets to the stage where you have to. You're not going to be a prisoner in your own home. But it was such a brutal attack. It was so unfair because obviously in these circumstances, we're talking about one person that's unarmed, even with a disability to a degree, if you want to say he's had a lot of health stuff going on. And then you've got a number of people on him in those situations. As a mother, you don't even want to think about that. Every mother out there loves their child, and the thought of that is just, when it first happened and I was driving up the hospital, it took all the will in the world for me not to be sick. I thought I was going to be sick in my own lap. It was that traumatic to think that actually I might not ever see him again, because I knew on the way up I'd had a second phone call from the police saying, this is way worse than we first experienced. We want to send a unit to get you or whatever. And that feeling is something else. It's like your heart broken, and I don't know whether my heart will ever feel the same again. It's hard. We've walked past where it happened now, but just try not to think about it too much. But it takes a very, very long time to get to this stage. We're a year down the line now. I was not myself. That's how badly it affected us and the kids. It was just trying to get through each day, really, make sense of it all.
Crazy. Obviously, before it happened, you've seen blood on the floor before. We've all seen blood stain on the floor. You never really think about the incident, what made that blood be there. So since this happened with your son, and now you've seen his blood on the floor, and you're fully aware of the situation around it, what thoughts do you get in your head when you see other blood stains on the floor?
Oh yeah, you see it in a completely different light. It stirs up all sorts of horrible emotions because that's what you've experienced, because you've seen the other side. You've seen beyond the blood on the floor. You've heard beyond the news, there's been another stabbing. That's easy to not take any notice of that. But when you've experienced it, and as a mother, this might sound strange, but after it happened, I thought on it. I knew everything that he'd been through. I'd seen on his face the panic and the fear. And I even thought about how he must have felt to have a knife in his back, and how it must feel for someone to put a knife in someone's back. I never considered thinking along these lines ever before. But when you do, you realise that it's not just a knife. It's not just a stabbing. There's no lightness around it. And you've got to remember that it's generally always one wound that is the fatal one. You don't need to keep stabbing at someone to kill them. It's just one in the wrong place or in the right place, depending on if that's what your intentions are. It's frightening. And then, it's just, I don't know what else to say on that. But where my mind went, and I know where my kids' minds ended up going, which is really sad to see as well, because you think no young children should be exposed to this. I've got a 3-year-old that talks all the time about naughty men and stabbings and stuff like that. That's not right.
And that's it. I think it's becoming normality now with the amount of stabbings. Quite scary, to be honest. Mentally still suffering, the suffering from yourself and the other children. Have you got any help? Have you been offered any sort of help to try and sort out maybe your mental health or anything like that? Is there any support that you've been given? Have you just been left to deal with it yourselves?
I hate to say, but we have been left to deal with it ourselves. It's not that we've not tried to reach out for help, because we have. On a physical level, my son at one point, picked up his baby brother. Another pneumothorax. He needed to go into hospital again to get it checked out because he'd lifted something and the lung was still weak. But on a mental level, I've said I don't like seeing my teenage boy, as much as it's lovely that he's playing with 3-year-old in the back garden or whatever. That's not him. That's not what he did before. That's not where his passion is. His passion is, the best buzz he ever got was being out with all his mates, and he had a lot of friends and doing all that. So things have changed massively. And I've reached out to people and said, look, I don't think this is good. I think we do need help. And as a family, I've talked to the local sort of CAMS about the 8-year-olds still having lots of problems as well. Because, if I could have undone it and they could have not seen him nearly collapse again in the hospital and things like that, you wouldn't. But there's no path of what to do in a situation like this. You do what you do, and then afterwards you reflect and think, crikey, the whole family has suffered here. Or every one of us is sort of struggling as a result of this. But the help, it hasn't come our way, let's put it that way. I didn't get any help from victim support despite contacting them a few times. We have a local group, Red Thread, which were really helpful and did follow things up. But it was more just speaking to me and to see if they could help on a practical level and give advice like that. CCTV and stuff, whatever. But the psychological help that I always thought would be there, which is we've got a thing called CAMS here, is still on the waiting list over a year later. So it's just been left to try and work things out for himself and try and be brave and, I wouldn't know where to start. How do you teach a teenager to start trusting again after something like that? How do you tell him which people you should trust and which ones you shouldn't? You can't. You're right. You can't.
Well, it sounds like he's doing really well, and it's coming a long way. So he should be proud of himself. That is for sure. In regards to knife crime, quite a lot of people are dying. I'm sure that people will call you lucky because you've still got your son. What are your feelings about that? Do you consider yourself lucky? Or are you is it just as hard?
Someone said to me actually exactly that. Quite soon after it happened, they say you're one of the lucky ones because he's still here. And I thought every day for weeks afterwards was throwing up different things. I can't tell you how many times we were in that hospital with more problems with the lungs, little air bubbles, scar tissue, this and that. So every day was a battle, and at the same time I was trying to be there for my children. I've got several children, and I tell you, I didn't feel lucky at all, because I thought, I'm one person trying to maintain this family, and all of a sudden I've gone from having no kids with psychological needs to all of them being scarred in one way or another. It was horrendous. So I didn't consider myself lucky. The only thing I would say is now, with a little bit of wisdom and a year down the line, I'm thinking, actually, I can see light. I can see time is a great healer. It's not something that will ever go away, because I can still have times now I wander around the post office and there'll be different triggers. Something will trigger. It might be like a ambulance sirens. It was at first, but sometimes for whatever reason, you're just reliving that event again. And I wish I could take that out of my mind, and I wish I could take it out of my son's mind, and I wish I could undo what all the kids have seen. So I don't feel lucky, because there's a certain amount that we've got to live for. I do feel lucky that I've got him, though. So, I put that out there, because I think the parents that have lost their kids, I'd 100%, 110% prefer to be in the position I'm in now than that. That's just, I don't see it as fair that any mother or father should ever have to bury a kid. I think it's got to be the worst thing in the world. And let's think of it on a level that we're not just talking about the pain the mum's feeling, we're talking about the pain the brothers, the sisters, the extended family.
Some parents are aware that their kids, or they might have an inkling that their kid is carrying a knife. Like, if you could say anything to those parents, what would it be?
Oh, I would say it's not going to be easy, but somehow they've got to man up and put the, they need to talk to the kid. They need to try and find out what their issues are, because there is quite often, I would say, a lot of underlying stuff. But I think as a parent, you've got to take responsibility. The responsibility begins with you as a parent. I've been a single parent for a number of years before meeting my husband now, and it's not easy as a single parent, because you ain't got the backup of another parent. But it doesn't change the fact the responsibility lays with the parents to begin with. And it's hard. I know I've got teenagers that have barged me out of the way and say, I'm not listening to you and whatever. But whatever it takes, you've got a responsibility to check what they're up to and do whatever is in your power to try and keep them safe and keep the people they're socialising with safe, and keep the community a safe place to be. And that starts with us on an individual level. There's an old saying, isn't there? If you think you're too small to make a difference, then you've never been in bed with a mosquito. It's what it is.
I love it. I love it. Well, that's it for me. I think you've answered everything I've wanted to know. As I said it before, I think you're doing very well. Your kids are doing very well. Your son. Is there anything that you'd like to add, or anything you'd like to ask me, or anything you'd like to say before we finish?
No, I think we kind of covered everything, really. It's just, from my point of view, I'm very grateful for all the effort that you've put in to doing this. From my point of view, it's just to let people know, look, this isn't just gang on gang stuff. This is affecting innocent people now, communities. It's affecting everybody, and each of us need to do whatever we can to try and turn things around. Let's try and make it a safer place for our kids. And I guess for anyone out there that's considering carrying a knife, I'd probably say reconsider. Like, look at the biggest impact. Think about what it would do to your mum if you took a knife in your back. Think about what your baby sister or your baby brother might go through as a result of it. You can't pick them up, you can't cuddle them for God knows how long if it's as serious as it was in our case. And the impact, as we've talked about psychologically, just goes on and on and on. It's down to us as individuals to make the right choices. And that is the only way we can make a difference. So if on the back of this one person decides to make the right choice, my work here is done.
I think they will, and that's another thing. You will feel like that you're just a little fish in a big pond, but don't give up. Keep passionate, keep positive, keep being persistent, and you will make a difference, definitely. Thank you for your time, Sally. It's been great listening to your story, and I'm sure you'll move on to do some wonderful things with young people.
Lovely. Thanks, Anthony.
Right, no worries. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you have enjoyed our podcast. You can keep up to date with the work we do around knife crime, gun crime and gang violence via our website www.alwaysanalternative.org.uk or our social media pages at AAA Mindset. Goodbye!